Yes, guys, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Adapt Performance Podcast. Got a solid episode for you today. So I am joined by Callum Hirst, and this is a really good one because we have a slightly different take on S&C, or at least his journey in S&C, as he's done a decent amount of strength and conditioning coaching for Roy Jones Jr. Okay, so this was just really cool for me to sit back and listen to his experiences with, one of the all-time greats of boxing. So really cool, just to listen, to be honest with you. And then we get into some questions. We put out a Q&A box out on Instagram over the last couple of days, and we go through some of those questions. So I'll list those off for you now, just so you've got an awareness of what we're going to get into. So what are the biggest differences that we observe between elite and non-elite athletes? We then go into picking 3 exercises for boxing. So always going to split the room in terms of thought processes. We then get into best advice to keep improving. And then finally, we wrap up with, is having a tight upper back bad for boxing? So very much a boxing type episode where we really do kind of delve into the nitty gritty, and we reference that quite a lot. Awesome episode. Callum fucking smashed it, didn't expect anything less. Go follow him on social media. Go check out his stuff. It looks super clean. He's doing great work. Just if you listen to these podcasts, do us a favor, go follow the guys that come on here, because it's, they're giving up some time to, come and chat to me, which is, they deserve way more than a follow for putting up with my shit. But also, I pick these people because they are super interesting and they're super credible sources. So 1, it helps them out and it pushes the algorithm. And then 2, it also gives you an opportunity to keep learning, and I think that's important. But anyway, so right, without further ado, this is the episode with me and Callum. Thank you. Yes, Cal, how's it going, mate? Welcome to the podcast.
Absolutely phenomenal, mate. Really, really happy to be on board. And it's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
It's been a long time, mate. You were, you messaged me as soon as it came out, and you was like, mate, let's do it. And I was like, it just took us a while to get through. And I think I'm buzzing for it. I know we've got some good questions lined up. I know I'm going to be able to pick your brains about some really exciting stuff that you've had going on in the past couple of months and years. But I think just to kick us off, mate, can you give the listeners a little bit of a rundown of who you are, what you do, where you've been, what you've done, all that type of thing, and then I'm gonna pick at it a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So I'll try my best not to forget anything. That's not me saying I've done everything, by absolutely no means. It's been a bit of a whirlwind really since kind of leaving university. So my name's Callum Hirst. I'm the head coach at Elevate Strength and Conditioning. Currently working out of the Unit Fitness Saddleworth over just by Oldham. Top-notch facilities, which it kind of vibes a lot with what I want to try and bring to the table and the athletes that I want to work with and currently work with. So that's where we're at currently, but kind of running it back. I was a failed athlete, shall we say. I ran 100 metres for GB up until the age of 16. Struggled a lot with injuries. Tried my hand at football. Was pretty good at that, but kind of tied in both with being quick, nimble, and same again, struggled with injuries. Then turned to professional motocross. Didn't quite pan out, wasn't really for me, preferred to stick it as a hobby. And I kind of found myself in a position where I wanted to be a professional athlete, but I struggled at keeping injury resilient. And I found a gap where there was a lot of individuals my age that were kind of looking for that next step, but injuries kind of held them back. So decided that the S&C route, sports science route, was definitely the area for me. I went to Sheffield Hallam, did 4 years there. So I did my undergraduate in sports science, did a master's year in strength and conditioning. Throughout that, I did 2 years at Sheffield Wednesday as part of their sports science department. Learnt a lot, learnt a hell of a lot. Learnt a lot about what I didn't want, which was quite important because when I first started there, I wanted to be in professional football. Saw that as the holy grail. I thought, brilliant, let's make some money, let's work with athletes all day. It's not the glitz and glam that I thought it was. So it did me a huge favour in letting me know that unless you're first team players or first team staff, you're very expendable. You yeah, you can be kind of chopped and changed at the click of a finger. And me personally, I work very much on respect, and I like to be valued. So I'll always go the extra mile for someone if they do the same back, and that wasn't the environment for me. So then, going back to kind of what I experienced as an athlete, I thought, well, what about if I do it on my own?
Right.
And that's where kind of the idea of Elevate came from. Started, in its infancy, just on gym floors, just talking to people, and then working kind of one-to-one with a lot of the athletes I knew from Sheffield Wednesday. And then it's just kind of snowballed from there. Had the brilliant opportunity to go to America with a local boxer called Fez Batista from Huddersfield, professional 2-0 at the time, really great guy. Saw a lot of the stuff that I was doing in the gym, noticed that it was different to general PTs. We got talking, found out a little bit about my background, wanted to bring me into the program, and yeah, just tried to showcase him exactly what he should be doing, which was quite interesting because anyone who's worked with boxers before, they have a very strong mindset in terms of what they think they should be doing and things that they shouldn't be doing and things that they think are just science nonsense, which then when we kind of got a mutual understanding of, it's not just nonsense, it's quite important that this new age stuff is brought into the program. He absolutely thrived with it then. So over the course of 18 months, we got him to perform at a level that he'd never seen before, didn't think was possible, at which point he then introduced me to Roy Jones Jr., so 9-time world champ. Thought I could help him a lot with. He had a very degenerative knee condition. He basically had no meniscus in either knees, really struggled with any kind of, light plyometric work, running, anything where there's any kind of impact, it caused him a lot of issues. So I came on board with him, showed him a lot of the blood flow restriction work that I'd done as part of my undergraduate dissertation. So that was probably about 2-3 years ago. He jumped at the chance, saw a lot of improvement in terms of how he was feeling, the pain relief, analgesic effect of the blood flow restriction gave him a feeling that he'd not had for many years. He even told me that he could play basketball to a level that he'd not played for 15 years previous, which, hold my hands up, I didn't know he was doing because I would advise against that. But Roy Jones is Roy Jones, and he will do what he wants, and I'm not a man to stand in the way. So basically, in a nutshell, over the course of 18 months from working with the boxer, got introduced with Roy, found myself in his gym over in Pensacola, Florida, and that's where kind of we tried to build the boxing academy over there and bring a lot of the new age stuff in. So from that, came home and tried to implement and elevate over here. So that's pretty much where we're at right now.
Mate, that's sick. That's
short story.
Yeah, mate, that's cool. I think that's super exciting. I think, if I'm thinking, right, if somebody offered me the chance to work with Roy Jones, I would fangirl so hard. Like, I'm not even kidding. It'd just be one of those where, I appreciate the sport of boxing. I love it. I used to always watch it. I'm still involved with it now. And there's certain celebrity figures, and I'm sure it'd be the same for a lot of people if they said, right, you can work with Mike Tyson, you'd be like, holy shit, let's go, and to the point where, you'd hope that your skill set and the way that you approach your strength and conditioning wouldn't change as a result of being in front of somebody so great. Talk me through that. Is that something you managed to kind of keep under wraps, or, was it like, oh, fuck, right, I've got to make an impression in here? Or did you manage to kind of separate the legend from the guy in front?
It was very tough. It was tough. The thing that really helped was he's arguably the most normal man I've ever met. And that kind of settled me straight away. From the minute I met him, I remember it to this day, we were in a hotel lobby in Newcastle up for the Chris Eubank Jr. fight a couple of years ago, and he was just sat there with his sliders, his Jordan tracksuit bottoms on, and came over and he introduced himself. He goes, "Oh, hey man, I'm Roy. Like, I've heard a lot about you." And instantly I was like, "Hang on, you've heard about me?" He's like, this is not normal. But the more I spoke to him, and the more he'd basically done his research on me. He'd obviously heard a lot from Fairs and a few of our team as well about the work that we were doing, and he was dead excited. And then he started asking me, more about what we were going to do and why we would do it. And then as soon as it kind of the pendulum shifted back towards my background in terms of the science behind everything, I'm a very science driven person. And then because we were kind of like on my realm, then it just became a lot easier to relax. But yeah, he definitely, when I first met him, I was like, that's Roy. I was like, and then when he came over, he's like, oh, hey, Callum, Roy. I was like,
yeah.
Hang on a second.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
But it's tough. It was tough. And then obviously after a while, I kind of, you don't almost forget, but he then became like, right, okay, he's another athlete that I need to get to that next little bit, and how can I do a little bit more to help him get that 1%, so that it then becomes more about, it's work driven.
Mm-hmm.
But then as soon as you go out from the gym and then he's then Roy Jones again, it was phenomenal. It was quite hard to get my head around at first, but we got there eventually. We managed.
Sick. So with going through your time working with him then, so you kind of got brought on just to help him essentially start moving again and get his knee right. Was that like the nuts and bolts of your relationship with Roy?
Yeah, pretty much that's how we started. It was a lot of the work that I did with the BFR work was with Fez, and he then reported back to Roy saying, my knees have never felt better. I'm doing all this work, I'm getting fitter, but I'm not struggling with the aches and pains that I were. And Roy was like, well, I want some of that.
Yeah.
So I was brought in purely to be the guy to help him fix his knee so he could then go and do his training outside of that. It was then as we got into it more and more, that I then kind of had a more of a pivotal role inside the entire gym. Roy would come in for his sessions, then I'd take a few of the other boxers. So I then became kind of the in-house S&C guy.
Sick.
But yeah, definitely to begin with, I was just coming in to help him a little bit with the knee, so then could pass him on to someone else.
Beautiful. So talk to us about the in-house S&C bits, like building the academy out. How did that look? Where's it currently at? Like, what's the story there?
So it was pretty much, I kind of came in as an unknown quantity. Obviously, I'm small guy from Huddersfield in England. A lot of people had never even heard of Huddersfield before. Well, I don't think any of the fighters, other than Fairs and one of his best mates, really knew where we were from, what we were about. So it was quite a learning curve to begin with. I knew I couldn't come in and straight away say, right, okay, this is what you need to be doing. You need to stop all of this. You need to start doing this. And it was definitely, I had to kind of get myself in there and kind of earn my own respect in my own right, which is right for, I think, any coach going into any sport. But anyone who's worked with boxing, I know you'll know the same. It's a little bit harder to try and earn respect out of boxers when you haven't been an accredited boxer yourself. I come from a background I'm not, from a fighting background in kind of any discipline. So for me, it took a little bit longer for me to kind of get in there and become a voice that they all listen to. But over the course of a couple of months, we got to a point where everything was routine. The biggest thing was recovery, teaching them about recovery, why it's so important, and letting them know that when they're finished in the gym, the work then begins for the next session. That was the biggest thing that I brought in to begin with, and that kind of then catapulted the rest of the program forward in terms of, as soon as they realised that and they saw that the benefits they were getting in their sessions later on in the week, that they weren't so tired, they didn't need 3-4 days to recover from a sparring session or a weight session. They're like, okay, well, actually let's listen to what he's saying here. So we kind of brought in, I devised a blueprint that they could all kind of follow, and then we just, would go off a little bit with, depending on what the individual needed. That is now in place there to this day, as far as I'm aware. And since me stepping in there and trying to implement this blueprint and giving them like a guide to follow, they the boxers inside then have now taken it to that next step. I know a lot of them are out in Vegas fighting at the minute. One guy, Andrew Murphy, he's doing phenomenally well. I remember when we started, he'd just gone to pro. He was 1-0 when we first walked into the gym, and now I believe he's 8 or 9-0, and he's taking it. He's really knocking on the door for that big fight that he deserves, and a lot of that comes down to he bought in 100%, hasn't diverted from that. So to this day, I think hopefully, touch wood, it's still going strong as a blueprint, and I think hopefully we've made a good difference.
Oh, mate, that's sick. I love it, mate. It's some really good stuff there, and I think one of the things that it made me kind of look back on is how opportunities really do come out of nowhere sometimes, and you could say luck, but I think it's more than luck, because you're putting yourself in situations where you have the possibility of, being around that type of thing. And I think that's super important. And it's easy to look back and draw a line. And I've spoke about this a little bit before, but there's a talk from Steve Jobs. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's his graduation ceremony or something. And he's speaking about when he got into college, he dropped out of one of his classes. And what happened? Yeah, he dropped out of one of his classes, and he was like, right, I need to make up some points. So he took up a calligraphy course, like typography, so learning about fonts and stuff. And he goes on to elaborate and say that the thing that differentiated the Mac, Apple Mac, from just normal PC was actually the range of fonts that they were able to provide. And he said that itself was the sole reason that it succeeded, and that was born from his failure, which is such a mad thing. And I love the story, 'cause I'm like, you can connect the dots looking backwards, and you can be like, right, Fez, Roy Jones, Academy, that's allowed you to have these life experiences. But it's, yeah, mate, I don't even know where I was going with that one, but I just thought it was a super interesting thing. And it's sick to hear, because I've never had that life experience. I've never, been flown out to Florida. I've never been around that situation, but mate, love it. So I guess moving on, mate, we've got a few questions that we put out on, we put out a Q&A box on Instagram. We've got a couple to kind of run through. So I think let's have a little bit of back and forth on this. And the first one I want to get into is, what is the biggest difference between elite and non-elite athletes then?
That's a phenomenal question. And that, do you know what? I can link a lot of that back to being over in Pensacola and working with the up-and-comers compared to, Roy and Fez and Andrew and Kevin. The biggest thing that I noticed was just persistence. They didn't stop. Nothing changed. They had a bad day training. All right, shrug it off. We're back in tomorrow. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure it affected them just like it would anybody else. But a lot of the up-and-coming guys, they saw the hard workers. That's it. Okay, job done. I've done my hard work. When's my big fight? And when that big fight doesn't come for 6-12 months, because, and I learned this the hard way, in boxing, things happen at the drop of a hat. Someone can pull out. There can be, someone misses a weight. Someone tests positive for PEDs. There are so many factors that can rip that carpet from underneath, that you then have to think, right, I've got to go back to the drawing board and work again for the next 6 months, or hope that something comes up. But when you've worked and grafted for, 6 months minimum, to then have it whipped away, a lot of them turn their back and say, okay, well, it's just obviously not meant for me. Whereas you talk to the likes of Roy and Fairs and Kevin, they've had that happen tens of times. And the only difference is they kept going. They persisted. They didn't let it say no. They was like, right, okay, well, something will come. I'm working too hard for it not to happen. And that's how they've got to the level that they have. I remember having a conversation with Roy, just sat around watching the other boxers, and it absolutely amazed me the hardship that he went through from amateur all the way through. And, you've only to look back at everything that happened in the Olympics, that he could have quite happily turned his back and said, you know what? No, I'm out. I'll try something else. He was a gifted basketballer. I'm sure he probably could have pushed something with that, but he didn't take no for an answer. He persisted with it and went pro and obviously did all the things that he did. And it's just, it's persistence and mental toughness. That's the biggest thing that I notice the difference between elite, the guys who make it, and the guys who want to make it but turn the back and say, no, it's obviously not meant for me. Yeah, persistence and mental toughness without a doubt.
It's really interesting that you were going through that. And I think, obviously, we've got these questions through this morning. So I was doing my little weights in my gym today, and I was like, right, how would I answer that question? And I actually came at it from a different avenue. And I 100% agree with what you said there. I think persistence has got to be part of it. You know, you are not going to be a world champion tomorrow. You're not going to be the best athlete tomorrow. So there's got to be an element of consistency and keep knocking at that door, and if nobody answers, you boot the bastard in. You know, it's one of those types of situations. And I guess when I think back to some of the elite athletes that I know, that's 100% the case. And I guess I went down more of a simple answer, actually, from like a pure S&C standpoint. What is the difference between elite and non-elite athletes? Well, the elite athletes are, for the most part, just better at the sport, you know, and it comes down to the fact that within the confinements of the game and the rules and, you know, the things that they have access to, they are just better at it. And you break that down, you've got skill set, you've got the technical aspect, you've got tactical, and then you've got the physical qualities that come within that. But ultimately, they find a way to win at that thing, whether it is, you know, sprinting, okay, whether it is boxing and they're able to outsmart the opponent to land that shot or win on points or whatever. But I think that they go hand in hand, because you are not going to be a world champion. You're not going to be the best at your sport and find it if you don't just keep pushing. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because you might not know whether it's going to pay off. And that's part of life, isn't it? You could just be knocking on that door and it never actually open, or you never actually get through it. What's your thoughts on all that, mate?
No, absolutely. I totally agree. I'd also add, and this is going to, you know, be very kind of like flip side. I've also seen some of the most talented athletes not make it because they haven't got the grit and determination it takes to work hard and keep working hard. I know, and this kind of relates a lot to football. I've seen it more in football than anything. The most talented players I've seen don't make it because they think they've already made it. So they stop working hard. And then when hard work reaches that talent level that I see in guys that have made it, they then surpass them because people see that hard work, coaches see that hard work, and same kind of relating back to boxing, promoters see people who work hard and want to help them. So I think it's definitely a mixture of the two. You've definitely got to be good at your sport, obviously, to make it, but don't ever let your talent don't ever feel your talent outweighs your ability, your need to work hard. You have to have the two. And then, like I say, the persistence to continue that. That's what gets you to that next step.
Yeah,
that's what the likes of me and you probably never had, and that's why we're good at what we do now.
Yeah, I'm weird. And with that, our psychologist that we have for Adapt, Sarah Broadhead, she spent a lot of time in GB Taekwondo. So around, I think she did 10 or 12 years working with, you know, some of the best in Taekwondo at the Olympic level, did a few Olympic games, and she now works in rugby, football, mountain biking, across the board. And she's written a book on athlete well-being and mental health. And in that, they have this chapter, or she has this chapter on obsession. And do you need to be obsessed to be a champion? And it's a really interesting question. You ask different people what that means. And, you know, I think ultimately you need to have like a clear definition of what obsession means. And what they're obsessed with. It's like, okay, are you obsessed with winning? Okay, well, obsessed with winning probably isn't the worst thing in the world, because you're probably going to take process-driven steps to get there. So you're not going to neglect, you're not going to overtrain as much. You're not going to, you know, neglect nutrition, hydration, all those types of things. Whereas if you are obsessed with the sport and you're obsessed with training, okay, well, now we've actually got a different view on it. And it's not about the end goal of winning. It's about a specific release or compulsion that you've got for that specific thing. And you know what? I see a lot of the elite athletes that I know that are very unbalanced, let's just say, and willing to be unbalanced because it means more to them to have that win and have that feeling of being the best. Whereas me, okay, I'm probably quite unbalanced in a lot of ways, but I think in a sense of like my actual lifestyle, I do a lot of things that I really enjoy. I can take some days off. I can listen to feedback and it not crush me. I think that unbalance is probably a big part of why they succeed in a lot of ways. They've got that driver, whether it's a good or a bad thing, there is a drive. And I just thought that was a good point to kind of finish on with that, mate. Any points to add, or you're happy?
I think you sparked one of my memories there that it highlighted straight away to me. I was thinking about this earlier. I remember just going back to the balance thing, that will to win. I've not seen as much of that in any other athlete than what I did in that boxing gym.
Mm.
Their drive to outwork and outgrind is second to none in my personal experience, to a point where I felt I had to step in and just kind of let them know, hey, I appreciate that you want to win so bad, you're willing to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and run. And when I asked them why they would do that, they'd say, well, my opponent isn't going to be doing that. I appreciate that, and I appreciate, the mental toughness it takes to do that. However, when you're back up at 7 o'clock in the morning for our weight session, is it going to be detrimental? In my opinion, yes, it is. But it was important to let them know that I appreciate that they've got that grind, and let them do that every once in a while so that mentally they know that they are the baddest man in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely finding that balance between, okay, let them do that because it's good, for their mental health, and them know that they are the guy.
Yeah.
But it's also got to be done in retrospect to looking at the bigger picture. Is that one top-notch thing gonna, be detrimental to the rest of the program? More often than not, yes. So finding that balance, it is huge. It is huge. And that's where we have the ability to kind of look back and look from a bird's eye view and say, right, okay, well, yeah, you're hyper focused on this, but let's put a bit of focus around here as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can help guide them through that. So no, I think obsession, it can be a tremendous motivator, but I think sometimes it has to be not caged, but steered into other avenues as well.
For sure. And I guess final point before we kind of move on to the next question, and what you're saying there around, there's got to be an element, the psychological safety, when you're getting in the ring or into a cage to go and fight another person and probably do one of the most primal things, but probably scary things that you could ever do. You've got to know that you've done everything that in your power to win. However, motivation alone will not get you there, because every dead body on Mount Everest was once a motivated person. Like, you've got to have the right strategy. You've got to have the right tools in place to make sure that you actually achieve the outcome. And that's super important. And yeah, I just thought that was a really, really good point for you there. Right, next one then. This is where, right, I'm going to preface this question with, we do not need to pick only 3 exercises for boxing. However, hypothetical, pick 3 exercises that you would use for boxing.
That's a real tough one. And I would just like to reiterate that point as well. I would not pick just 3. Mm-hmm. I did a post with the gym a couple of weeks ago about my top 5 best exercises for team sport athletes. There isn't just 5 that we use. Obviously, we use a plethora depending on what the individual needs. But if I had to narrow it down to 3, I'm a huge fan of single leg plyometric work. So I do quite a lot of split stance trap bar jumps.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's phenomenal, particularly for adjusting any imbalances from left to right, because obviously they spend a predominant time in their stance. So making sure that it's a good tool as well for me analysing, are we just kind of tipping the scale towards, are we left dominant? Do we need to pull it back a little bit? More for kind of injury resilience than anything. But then obviously the crossover into boxing, they're in that split stance quite a lot. Obviously, I'm a big believer that we don't have traditional sport-specific exercises, but I do think that if we can mimic the positions and the angles that they're in more often and make them more explosive, for me, we're going to get a very, very good crossover into performance.
Mm-hmm.
So split stance trap bar jumps, it would probably be my number 1. Upper body-wise, I'm a huge fan of, again, kind of split stance push press.
Mm-hmm.
Same kind of stance, obviously making sure that we're alternating, but then looking at, rate of force development in the upper body as well. I do sometimes take that down into a half kneeling position and do it single arm, depending on, if we've got anything that we need to work around. I know being in that overhead position with both arms can be quite uncomfortable. A lot of boxers tend to be very internally rotated in the shoulders. So if that is the case, then obviously I would take them down into a half kneeling position, take the bilateral stance out of the equation. So that would be kind of number two. So split stance, overhead push press, but with the option to take it down to half kneeling. And then number three, I'm a massive fan of banded triple threats.
Cool.
That would be my third one, purely from an injury resilience perspective, making sure that we're working, multiple planes of motion in the shoulders. Like I said before, a lot of boxers are internally rotated in the shoulders, so it's a good way for us to pull that chest back out and work the anterior chain as well. So yeah, that would be my third one. Would be banded triple threats.
Man, I love it. And this is a really good one. I think obviously we don't need to pick three, but it's a really good thought experiment for us. Just be like, right, okay. So what would I pick if I had to? And you can come at it from a few different standpoints of like, okay, do we play more of a sport specificity standpoint? Do we play more of an injury resilient standpoint? And I want to give a few examples here, actually. It depends, but getting away from answering the question probably. I'm trying to sneak it.
I want to hear it. Yeah. I want to hear it.
So I guess pick three exercises for boxing. So a few things that I would probably want to know before I could really delve into this, I guess. So are they professional or are they amateur? And I think that would kind of change my view a little bit, actually, because I think that might give us a little bit more of an idea of how long they've been training potentially. It might give us a little bit more of an idea of actually how are people winning in that level of the sport. So for example, amateur boxing, okay, everyone wants that knockout power. However, if you look at the actual results of amateur boxing, people are just not winning by knockout. It's points wins, okay? Does that change where you invest your time potentially? You start looking at, okay, so that's from something I would want to know there. If we look at the injury rates in boxing, some of the three key areas you'll probably find, other than face and head, because that's part of it, is you're going to get hand injuries, okay? So you're going to get a lot of trauma around the hand and wrist. Okay, you're then going to get a lot of trauma around the shoulder. Okay, cool. And you're also, which is kind of a little bit of a red herring here, is you get a lot around calf and ankle. And then it's like, and that's probably a mixture to do with the amount of on-feet volume of boxing, but also the tradition and the tendency to want to run to get a lot of your conditioning work. And I've got an example of this at the moment where one of our guys, he's just starting a fight camp and his running volume's ramped up massively, and, there we go, shin splints. It is what it is. We know it's going to happen, but we don't know where that line is until we cross it sometimes. So a few things there just to think about. But the three that I wrote down, I'll give you a little bit of a rationale around it. And I really like your answers. And I've scribbled out a few of mine as you were going. I'm like, okay, that's a good one. So I've thought about this as I definitely want to get some element of lower body power in there. And I've gone for a bilateral, I've gone for two legs, and I've wrote it as repeated counter movement jump. And you could see, I'm going to call it like a shallower counter movement jump in a sense, but we're focusing on maximum height, some really quick ground contacts. And the idea being that we are essentially just going to get the lower body really powerful, the ankles involved, the knees involved, the hips involved. We know that force is transmitted through the lower body up into the fist. And I love your example there of using push presses as an opportunity to achieve that force transfer, super important. So I've gone with that. I've then gone to essentially isolate the upper and the lower body in separate parts. So I've used a bench press, but specifically I've used a Swiss bar bench press. Swiss or a football bar, for anybody that isn't aware, is essentially a barbell, but you have freedom to move your hands and you have like different grips. So you can go full neutral, you can go semi-supinated, you can go semi-pronated. So you have options there to pick a bench press grip that suits how you want to do it, And I would say, for the most part, picking something where your elbows are at like a 45-degree angle, really nice way of going about it. And the reason why I've picked a bench press, there is some research to suggest, and I think, probably an element of this which I think is pretty true. Get strong through the upper body is going to allow you to land a harder punch by changing the force velocity profile and getting somebody able to just generate more force. And then the final one is I went for a trap bar. So a trap bar deadlift as a way of getting the lower body super strong. I picked trap bar instead of a half squat because, well, I scribbled out squat as you were talking. I put trap bar because you were speaking through a little bit of sport specificity. If we think about punching, we're in a little bit of a higher up stance. We're not squatted down super deep. So I was like, okay, I could probably get away with squat not being a part there. Let's go with trap bar a little bit higher up, and you get the added benefit of using a little bit of grip. So you can hold on to it. So then you tick that grip and hand injury standpoint. So yeah, really interesting one for me to sit down there, mate. Was there any thoughts on that? And this is something that I think we could debate for forever.
Oh, we could go back and forth until we're blue in the face. I'd really liked that you touched on, the running aspect of that. It's obviously a lot of boxers will know road running is kind of seen as the holy grail of conditioning, which was a big factor in what I did in Roy's gym. Was I implemented a maximum road running mileage per week, because I found that the majority of the injuries that we were getting, particularly around ankles and calves, like you touched on there, John, was there were a lot of them were running like 10 mile a day on top of 3 hours in the gym, which is very, very it's extensive plyometrics, but done over the period of 3 hours, you rack up a lot of force through the ankles and knees and the hips. So I implemented that, which didn't go down very well to begin with, but after the course of 5-6 weeks, we went from four guys that had niggling lower body injuries to none. Which then when I pulled them back to that and highlighted that, they're like, oh, well, yeah, no, I've not done as much road running. And which then obviously gave them the answer that I was trying to say without being too, forceful. So yeah, no, definitely on that. I think just as you were chatting there, one exercise that I was really toying with that I really like was an overhead partial squat. So kind of like a quarter squat, but with barbell pressed isometrically above the head. I liked that a lot just because of the isometric portion of that in the shoulders, whilst utilising obviously lower body power. But the reason I didn't go with that was it's a very in-between exercise. You can't load it heavy enough to really get, the adaptation you want in the lower body. And it's also not as obviously forceful for the upper body, but it's an exercise that I like to implement in there just as kind of like mainly more of an extended warm-up than anything. But yeah, it didn't quite make the cut.
Yeah, mate. And I think just to kind of wrap that question up, what you kind of mentioned there around the overhead quarter squat and how, it's kind of an in-between exercise, and there's an element of compromise where you can get a good amount of stuff from both, but it doesn't tick the box 100%. And this takes me back to a podcast that I listened to with Gary Hutt, who is the senior S&C coach at GB Boxing Sheffield. And he did a really great podcast with James DeLacy on the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. And they were speaking through using shadow boxing as a conditioning modality. And it was kind of that debate of, okay, is shadow boxing the best? And it's like, well, it depends on what you want to get from it. It's like, it's a good thing because you get more time on task and you can practice technique and you can do those types of things, which is great. So you get skill work, but you get fitness work. However, if you ramp that up and you make it, really high intensity, the shadow boxing tends to dog shit. So you don't actually get that skill component, but realistically, because of the nature of shadow boxing, you don't really get a great conditioning element from it. So it's almost picking and choosing, whereas certain tools might be better suited. So, shadow boxing might be a little bit of a lower intensity modality, and you do more of your high intensity stuff on a bag, or you do it through your sparring, you do it through some off-feet conditioning, some air bikes, whatever. And I thought it was just a good thing to kind of mention there is that all exercises do have an element of compromise based on what you're trying to achieve. Like no exercise does every single thing. So it's almost you checking where you're at and your current snapshot through your athletic career and your injuries and what you're trying to achieve and choosing the best tool for the job at that time. But yeah, really good. I love that, mate. Good answers. Next one. Best advice to keep improving.
So, best advice to keep improving. I think that's this back to the previous question about what's the difference between elite and amateur. Is persistent, be persistent. Keep going. That combined with like we touched on earlier, kind of running a needs analysis. What do I need to work on, and then looking at what do I need to work on versus what do I need to be successful at my sport. So take that into a boxing example. Let's say, obviously, boxing you need to have very good repeated intense bouts, so the ability to repeatedly perform in intense sequences and punch combinations, but then the ability to recover while still working. If I've got, let's say, if we are a very, very good aerobic conditioned athlete, but my ability to recover from anaerobic bouts is really poor, I'm going to look at that and highlight that and say, right, okay, that's what I need to work at to get to that next step. So kind of running the needs analysis of what do I need and what do I need to be good at the sport compared to where I am now. That's definitely where I'd start. And then on top of that is just being persistent with that, consistently running these needs analysis I run a needs analysis every couple of weeks with every single athlete. Okay, where are we now? Where have we come from? What do we then need to, what's the next belt loop that we need to have on our performance belt?
Love it. Mate, you know what, as you were going through that one, we've kind of done a reverse. So earlier on, you went down a little bit more of a philosophy standpoint. And now you've brought it back and you've gone more S&C by speaking through needs analysis and getting another snapshot, another idea of where you're at within that intervention. I've gone the opposite this time. So I've gone a little bit more away from S&C in a lot of ways.
The old switcheroo.
Yeah, the old switcheroo, mate. Let's keep them guessing. Good cop, bad cop. So in terms of best advice to keep improving, and I guess it depends where you are. That's the thing. It depends where you are and what you haven't currently done and what your lifestyle's like. And there's a million and one things that could basically keep that needle moving forward. But if I'd look back to in my own training, right, some of the things that have made an instant improvement in how well I train and some of the adaptations I get. And there's some really daft ones here, but I've wrote a little bit of a list. I'm not really a music person. As soon as I started wearing headphones and put music on, okay, I had better sessions for a short amount of time. It was a new thing. It was something that was different. It gave me a buzz. Caffeine. If you're not used to having caffeine, as soon as you take caffeine, you have a few coffees, boom, you get instant improvement. So we're talking short term here. A really weird one, new equipment or new shoes. Okay, if you get a new t-shirt, you go into a gym and you're a champion. Same with boxing gloves, same with trainers, same with a new groin guard, whatever it is, little things like that, just keep you chipping along. Training partners, okay? It's just nice to be around new people that have different strengths, different weaknesses, bring a different environment, different vibe to your training that allows you to keep improving and focusing on that day to day. That one's been huge for me, actually, and I think mastering that, game changer if you can get it. And obviously it's not always appropriate to change your training partners too often and that type of thing. Goal setting, okay? You need to, you spoke about needs analysis and doing them fairly often to reassess where you're at. You've got to have goals. And I think whether you want to call it smart targets or whatever, but I think having a longer term goal is important. And just where do you want to be? And it's just having a few words, right? I want to be a better boxer. Okay, cool. Let's boil that down. What are your medium term? What are your short term things that are going to allow us to get there? Right. I want to jump 45 centimeters, counter movement jump, hands on hips, whatever. I want to be able to run a sub 20-minute 5K. And then it's just about chipping away towards that. Then the final one, and I'm smiling as I say it because it's definitely the answer I was always going to give. Get somebody who's a professional, get a coach. That's it. It's just I don't want to say it, but I'm going to fucking say it. Like, just get a coach. It makes such a difference. It's the same as like trying to work on your own car, right? It's if you're not a mechanic and you don't have those skills and you don't have the equipment, you don't know the shortcuts, you don't have the experience, the time that you will save by getting somebody to take care of all that stuff and give you a non-biased, opinion that is outside of your emotional response to your own training is so, so powerful.
You good?
Yeah, changes the game. Any thoughts on those, mate?
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. That last one's a massive one. And obviously, people will turn around and say, well, yeah, but it's your business. You're going to be biased. Yeah, we are. But we also understand the value that coaches bring. I personally use a coach to help me with my training. I don't know if you do as well, Jordan, but it helps massively just keeping you grounded and keeping you going in the direction that you need, not the direction that you want. I'm really bad for training what I'm good at. So I do a lot of sprints, a lot of jumps because I'm good at them. The strength work I've always been okay at, but I'm definitely not. I'm not a strength athlete. Since having a coach, I've improved my own performance, both with racing bikes and playing football tenfold, just because what previously were my weaknesses are now strengths, and I've still remained, powerful, on the velocity side of things as well. So I think definitely having a coach is, for me, is if you can afford a coach, it's the number one.
Mhm.
Absolutely, no doubt. I think definitely if you're an aspiring athlete or you're already a pro looking to take that next step, having someone in your ear who's not scared to turn around and say that's bullshit or what you've done there was terrible. That's everything. We all need bringing down to earth every now and again. I'm sure a lot of athletes get smoke blown up their ass quite often, telling them how good they are. It's the job of a coach to tell them when they are shit, because that's when you take heed. You're like, oh, no one's ever spoke to me like that before. I better do something about it. We all need that.
Mhm.
So 100%, if you can afford a coach, that would be 100% number one, no doubt.
Yeah, and I think, obviously we spoke through coaching, it comes with an element of a financial um, investment, and not everyone has that, and that's, that is just the way it is. If you don't have a coach and you don't have the money for a coach, I think that the internet is a great place at the moment. You could definitely find a coach that is putting out enough free information, free programs, free blocks, phases, whatever, where it's worth just following that thing. I love social media because it gives you a snapshot of information. However, putting those pieces together is probably the most important and the most difficult thing if you don't have the skills and the know-how. So if you can find like a 4-week phase that a boxing S&C coach has put together, and it's free or cheap, follow it. It'll work wonders. And I think, yeah, I think that's a good point to finish on. I think find some way of you taking your own progress out of your own hands in a lot of ways. I think a pre-made program can do that. It's not as good. It's definitely not as good. However, it is better than just kind of winging it. Winging it probably will not get you where you want to be.
Absolutely, no doubt, no doubt. The amount of footballers I see that follow a bodybuilding program, it makes me cringe.
Mm.
There's so much, like you said there, there's so much free content out there that tells you exactly, if you're an athlete, you should be training more like this. And there's so many different resources out there. There's no, pretty much. I think we touched on everything that there was there. Yeah, it's, like I say, having a coach is just, it's so much better. But like we said before, there's so much free stuff out there. There's no excuse for not training somewhat optimal for who you are and your sport. So yeah, no, I think we pretty much touched everything there.
Sick. Cool. And then I guess the final question that we'll kind of get into, mate, was is a tight upper back bad for boxing then? Because this is one of those things, and I've put out posts around improving your thoracic spine mobility for boxing, and I've done that. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I've not come across too many boxers that have a tight upper back. Flip side, I've come across a lot that have a very, very tight chest and tight anterior shoulder complex.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely, I have seen quite a few boxers struggle with shoulder problems from that. So, coming back to the question, having a tight upper back, I could see it definitely limiting, kind of reachability, and then being able to generate as much recurring force, so being able to throw combinations due to lack of rotational power. So I think it would definitely be somewhat detrimental. I personally have come across more on the flip side of the front side of the body being tighter. I think definitely if you are tight anteriorly or posteriorly, and we're not kind of chasing that, ever that kind of dangling carrot of being symmetrical, then definitely continue working. So, like you touched on there, a lot of thoracic mobility, making sure that we're working the shoulders through multiple ranges of motion and multiple planes is definitely key to making sure that we're trying to be as rounded as possible. So, yeah, I think definitely trying to chase symmetry is one of the main things that I do, particularly from an injury resilience standpoint. So, if you do find yourself either tight, kind of front or back, anterior or posteriorly, definitely seek out either help or do some research on, trying to correct that and get back to being as symmetrical as possible.
Love it, mate. And I think the point there that I thought was really interesting is around symmetry not necessarily being the aim long term. The human body is asymmetrical in itself. We are not meant to be this perfect rectangle shape, and we're not meant to always have left is the same as right or front is the same as back. And it's one of the principles we come back to with strength and conditioning quite often is the idea of the SAID principle, so specific adaptation from imposed demands. And the idea being that your body will adapt to what you repeatedly give it. So if you're going to be a boxer that is constantly holding your guard, okay, where your shoulders are tucked, you're protecting your chin, okay, you are going to end up with, a little bit of tightness through the front and through the anterior shoulder, which means you might get a little bit more length through the upper back, which means that it might be a little bit more rounded over, a little bit more turtle shell-esque. And it's not a problem until it's a problem, I think, a lot of times. And it's nice just to give people options. And I do include some thoracic mobility work, both extension-based as well as rotation, just to give them the range you mentioned around reach, just to give them the option to have that. And I think when I think about improving movement, it is a lot of the time just to give them options, to make sure that we're not getting pain, we're not getting things that stop you from being able to do the thing that you want to do, which is boxing in a lot of cases. But yeah, you're definitely right in what you say there around a little bit tighter chest, a little bit tighter front and shoulder. And it's a difficult question to answer when you think about, okay, well, if we're not actually striving for perfect symmetry, then what do we allow? And that's a really, it's like, well, what do we allow? Because the nature of it is if you're in a staggered stance, you are going to end up with a little bit. It's part of it. And me being right-handed, I'm probably a little bit more asymmetrical because of that thing. So, yeah, really interesting question. I think going back to the actual question, is a tight upper back bad for boxing? Not unless it is painful or stopping you from punching effectively for a long term is probably my answer there.
Yeah, I totally agree. If it's not detrimental to performance, is it really a problem?
Yeah, we'll take that. Mate, that's sick. I think that's a really good point to finish on. We've absolutely whittled through some questions there. So just to recap for people that weren't following along as well, we got Roy Jones Jr. going through Cal's experience there, differences between elite and non-elite athletes, best 3 exercises for boxing, wink, wink, best advice to help to keep improving, and then is a tight upper back bad for boxing? So really quality episode there. Really enjoyed it. Thanks again for your time today, mate. That was absolutely sick. Where can people find out a little bit more about you and what you're kind of putting out there?
Yeah, so no, it's been great. It's absolutely flown by. But we could sit and talk all day. But if you'd like to hear more from me and find out more on how we can continue to help you, elevate_strength_conditioning on Instagram. Exactly the same on TikTok. And if you do have any questions, you can find all my contact details at www.elevatestrengthconditioning.com. Fill in with the form there. There's my number on there. Hit me up anytime I can help.
Beautiful. Mate, I'll put all those bits of information in the show notes below. Interesting that you mentioned TikTok, actually, because that's one of the things that I'm not very good at TikTok, to be fair. I don't know if you caught much traction on there.
We're getting there. I'm just trying to link Instagram and TikTok together. So, because I'm getting two kind of different demographics, I get a lot of aspiring footballers from what I can see on TikTok that react to a lot of the stuff. So I always find it really interesting to see the different kind of demographics that you get from different social platforms. So I'm trying to push it as much as I can. It's just social media is like a full-time job.
Oh, proper. Yeah. That's the thing with like owning your own business. It's, you get to choose what 80 hours of the week you work, which is great, but you've still got to work the 80 hours, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, mate, that's sick. Thank you very much again for your time. That was quality.
Absolutely brilliant, mate. Thank you very, very much. Loved it.